Hampton Court, on the edge of London. Once the pleasure palace of Henry VIII, today it attracts almost 1 million tourists a year.
That's the #1 question. Where's the Royal Loo?
It's one of Britain's biggest palaces, with 750 acres of remarkable grounds.
You have to imagine Hampton Court as a deep dish lasagna, built up of layers of history.
Amazing spaces and staff.
Everything about this room says the power of the Tudors.
Stuffed with history.
Various officers were based here. One of them was a chap called Winston Churchill.
And incredible discoveries.
This is a moment I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
A palace packed with historic secrets, still full of life today.
Mr. Darcy, eh?
In this episode, we uncover the story of Henry VIII's secret son.
Why not make him legitimate and put him on the throne?
The garden team are busy planting thousands of bulbs for the biggest tulip festival in Britain.
This is a big project for us.
And we unearth an extraordinary relic from the archives.
Family legend goes that this was the leather jerkin left by Charles I.
It's autumn at Hampton Court, and team leader Kitty Casely is unlocking the 500-year-old palace ready for visitors.
So we're just going into the Haunted Gallery to open up the Tudor route for the day. Lots of slightly stiff doors and difficult bits to get used to. Just turning on all the various hidden switches to get picture lights on. Opening up the palace, it's never quite as simple as you'd expect. Despite having worked here for over 7 years, I still, on a regular basis, find myself tripped up by forgetting a light switches down the corridor and not where you'd expect it to be.
As many as 1,500 visitors pass through these rooms every day. And it's up to Hampton Court's palace hosts
Before this was a Tudor palace, it was a manor house.
to help bring this historic building to life. As Henry VIII's favourite party venue with over 200 years of royal residence, there's always a story to be told.
Henry VIII crept up on Anacleese in disguise and surprised her. She screamed so loudly that this, of course, bruised Henry VIII's ego, and the marriage was doomed.
You would have had James I watching Shakespeare here, as Elizabeth had before him.
It's not just the palace that's on display. Visitors can also explore Hampton Court's 60 acres of famous formal gardens, home to the world's oldest puzzle maze and 3 national plant collections. Out in the grounds, Head of Gardens Graham Dillamore is on his morning commute.
So I've been walking this walk now for over 35 years, and it never ceases to amaze me to see Hampton Court looming up in front of me. Under the ground here, there are lots of different layers of history, and people often ask if this garden is from Charles I or Henry VIII, and I always answer them the same way by saying, well, you have to imagine Hampton Court as a kind of a deep dish lasagna. It's kind of built up of layers of history that are all stacked upon each other.
Over the centuries, several royal residents have left their mark on the palace's grounds. Henry VIII had a vast orchard and deer park. Charles II created the Long Water. But perhaps the biggest botanical enthusiast was Queen Mary II, who brought to the palace one of the greatest tulip collections in the world. Inspired by Mary's legacy, Graham and his team are now preparing for a massive celebration of tulips, which will bloom here next spring.
Our tulip festival is in its infancy. We're only in the 2nd year now, and we're still learning a little bit about what works in certain areas. It's so lovely to show the tulips, how they developed over history and through time, but also display the really wide and rich range of colours that they all have. Because I think often people see them in petrol stations and you just see the normal standard cut flower tulips. And I think people are going to be overwhelmed by it all.
The Tulip Festival is a challenging undertaking. It's set to be the biggest in the UK, with an ambitious 120,000 flowers on show.
So Hampton Court has got the really, really nice mixed pink, purple and white.
They're all set across here.
Yeah.
Graham and his colleague Ben Pilgrim are doing a stock check on the tulip bulbs.
That's great. Well, that's a new blend for us this year.
Yeah, nice. People like that.
This year, they're hoping to wow the crowds with 60 different varieties of tulips. That's a lot of bulbs and a lot of names to keep track of.
I like the Madonnas and the Ronaldos. You know, if it's called Ronaldo, it's going to be good.
The bulb store is the culmination of a whole year of planning.
So we order them in June from a catalogue. We're just trying to blend the colours and heights and the times of flowering. And then it's not until October that they all arrive. So actually you've kind of forgotten. You've forgotten what they look like. So you have to remind yourself in the catalogue, what does Angelique look like?
It's yellow.
Yeah, he knows them. Okay.
But nothing can be taken for granted. An especially wet winter or an overly dry spring could ruin months of preparation.
Some bulbs can be a little bit unreliable. They might come on different heights and things.
So we'll have to wait and see what this year brings.
The 810 acres at Hampton Court require constant upkeep. Tourists get to explore the beautiful array of formal gardens surrounding the palace.
Gorgeous morning. It is.
But tucked away in the paddocks, on the border of the River Thames, a special retreat has been installed for some rather smaller visiting guests.
We're going to go and look at the San Martin bank today. We're just going to go and see if there's any maintenance we can do to try and improve the colony for next year.
In 2014, Park and Estate Manager Nicholas Mallory Garbett and his team helped build a nesting site for a local colony of sand martins. It's already been a huge success, and Nicholas and his colleagues Dennis Mantle and Jeff Hill want to encourage the birds to return this year.
So do we need to clear all of this?
Yeah, I think so.
Sand martins spend the winter in Africa. Then these little birds travel up to an astonishing 3,500 miles to nest in sandy cliffs across the UK during summer. They've been making this journey for at least 1,600 years and would have been a familiar sight to Henry VIII as he rode out along the river. But the colony has recently come under threat due to nearby maintenance work on the Thames. The sand martins feed mainly over water, so if they're going to attract them back, Nick and his team need to remove the vegetation that's collected around the pond over the winter.
I haven't put these on for a while, so hopefully there's no leaks in there.
And it's mucky work, so Nick climbs into something a little more practical.
Yeah, they got a bit of a strange look to them, though. It's like a big nappy, isn't it?
And a little less fashionable, to start clearing the pond.
Yeah, maybe if I pull it this side, we can
Push it out.
fork it out on the bank, yeah. Maybe we can pull it out with a bucket after.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's full of life. There's lots of pond snails in here. Pretty smelly, though.
Once Nick and Jeff have got rid of as much as they can by hand, it's time to bring in the big guns to finish the job. Dennis needs to get close to the edge of the pond to clear what's left. But not too close.
You don't need to go any further than that.
Just another 6 inches.
Yeah, go on.
6 inches.
Careful there, Dennis.
Yeah, that's it. I won't go in any more.
Dennis and his precariously perched digger make light work of the job. And the last of the vegetation is finally cleared. Ready for the next round of summer guests.
So we're hopeful, now that we've done this work, next year we'll be able to see an increase in the amount of sand martins that are used in the bank. That would keep us happy, yeah.
Coming up, Tracy discovers Henry VIII's secret son.
I think he's trying to impress his father, the king, with this letter.
Henry IX goes missing.
He ate his food, obviously came in overnight, but he's missing at the moment.
And the head gardener attempts to grow a flower last seen at Hampton Court centuries ago.
The reward to get a plant flower as it did 300-400 years ago is something special.
Hampton Court is famous for being Henry VIII's favourite palace, but it was originally built for someone else.
He wasn't actually a member of the Tudors himself, but he was very pivotal to the creation of the very building we're standing in right now. And his name was Thomas Wolsey.
Cardinal Wolsey was Henry VIII's chief advisor and the owner of Hampton Court. Known as the Other King, Wolsey carried out Henry's foreign affairs, managed his wars, and organised the famous Field of the Cloth of Gold, a lavish meeting to improve relations between Henry and the King of France. But another key responsibility was looking after one of Henry's most important secrets, his hidden son. In 1519, Bessie Blount, one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting, had an affair with Henry VIII and gave birth to a baby boy. He was named Henry Fitzroy, which means son of a king. The trouble was, though Henry was desperate for a son, Fitzroy was illegitimate. Historic Royal Palace's chief curator Tracy Borman is keen to discover more about this mysterious royal child. Her investigation leads to a panelled suite far away from the tourist trail at Hampton Court, known as the Wolsey Rooms.
You can imagine the whispered conversations, the intrigue that was going on right here in these rooms. You can almost feel the history coming out of the walls.
It was here that Cardinal Wolsey secretly managed the life of the young Henry Fitzroy.
There was quite a lot of discretion employed by his father, the king, who entrusted his care, his upbringing and education to Cardinal Wolsey.
But Henry VIII soon began acting like a doting parent, requesting regular updates on his son's progress.
Henry was particularly concerned that his son couldn't speak Latin very well, and that may have been because Fitzroy was missing a couple of teeth. It was reported that Fitzroy is something inclined to lisp, but with the changing of his teeth, that fault may be amended.
Over the years, the father-son relationship appears to have blossomed, and in 1525, when Fitzroy was just 6, Henry's illegitimate son was brought into the public eye. The king lavished him with titles, including the dukedoms of Somerset and Richmond, a move that instantly made him the highest-ranking noble in England. Tracy's come to the National Archives in Kew to look for evidence of just how close father and son were.
These are the state papers of Henry VIII, so they're all the most important documents relating to the king. So I think it's rather touching that amongst these, there's a letter from his son. And here it is. I'm so excited to see this. I've never seen it before.
The 7-year-old Fitzroy is writing a thank you letter to Henry VIII.
I have received your most honourable and goodly New Year's gift, and give unto your said grace most loyal thanks for the same.
The letter shows how much Fitzroy cared for his father.
I think this bit's particularly lovely. Fitzroy writes that this letter is penned with mine own hand for a poor token. He's actually managed to write this letter, and in a very good hand as well. This is not a boy who is a natural scholar at all. But also, I think what comes across quite strongly is he's trying to impress his father, the king, with this letter.
His words reveal more than just an affectionate bond.
What's really interesting is that he signs it Henry Richmond, so he's proudly displaying his new title of Duke of Richmond. This is all part of the king putting his illegitimate son on a very public stage. He's no longer a secret. He's parading him for the world to see, giving him honours and titles. It's clear from this that he has great plans for Fitzroy.
When he wrote his heartfelt letter, little Fitzroy couldn't have known that he would one day come extraordinarily close to being England's future king. Hampton Court is a time capsule of British history and priceless collections. Head gardener Graham is deep in the palace's botanical archive, known as the Florilegium Society Room. He's in search of historic records that might give him a clue about the tulips Queen Mary II planted here.
How wonderful.
Back in the 1680s, Mary went on a spending spree, buying up rare species of tulips from aristocratic homes across France and the Netherlands. It's no surprise to learn that she had one of the largest private plant collections in the world, containing over 2,000 different species. Graham is keen to include some of the tulips she introduced to Hampton Court in the upcoming festival.
I like to mix things up, so it's nice to have a collection of modern varieties and we can use them in a modern setting. And they're always guaranteed to flower, they're great vibrant colours. But one of the interesting things about our festival is we use these very old historic varieties. They're quite expensive and they need careful handling. But the reward to get a plant flower as it did 300-400 years ago is something special.
Graham's hoping to find records of some of the heritage bulbs he's bought to see how they'll flower.
Here's what I'm looking for. Tulip acuminata, the Turkish tulip. Hopefully, this is what we'll see next spring after we've planted the bulbs this autumn. Wonderful fringed and flaming flowers, quite delicate. And if we can get it looking like this out there in the orangery garden, I'll be very happy.
Armed with fresh inspiration, Graham is heading back to the beds in Fountain Court. They will form the centrepiece of the Tulip Festival come springtime. His team has been planting bulbs for 10 days. Over 60,000 are in the ground so far. With another 60,000 to go, it's all hands on deck to get the rest planted before winter sets in.
We'd plant about 11,000 bulbs today. We usually plant big beds like this with a team of about 4 or 5. It just makes it go a little bit quicker and less back-breaking on everyone if we can get it done quick. Steve's an old hand at this.
It's very back-breaking, yes. You need to, stand up and stretch a little bit now and again. You know, at the end of the day, hot bath.
Until the 1700s, tulips were so highly prized they would never be planted en masse. An exotic novelty reserved for royal gardens, each bulb would be individually placed, like a jewel in a crown. Nowadays, it's about quantity as well as quality.
So this blend that we've got here is a lilac, mauve and white blend. It's funny, isn't it, when you do tulips now in October, you have to have quite a big imagination of what the colour's going to be like in April. It seems a long way off.
Henry! Come on in, Henry.
Whilst Graham ploughs on with the planting, his colleague, Martin Einchcombe, is on a rather different mission altogether.
We're going along glass houses here looking for Henry, our resident cat. He went a little bit AWOL yesterday afternoon. He ate his food, obviously came in overnight, but he's missing at the moment.
Henry!
Henry's been the palace cat for over 7 years.
You couldn't want to live in a better place than here for a cat. Have all this estate to wander around.
With an access all areas pass, there are plenty of places to hide.
Henry, come on then. Want some breakfast? Henry, come on. Come on in.
He's one of a long line of cats, all called Henry, to take up residence on this royal estate. This particular Henry is known as Henry IX. But back in the 1500s, there nearly was a real Henry IX here at Hampton Court. He was the secret son of Henry VIII and was called Henry Fitzroy. As Fitzroy grew up, his father lavished more and more attention on him. He was given his own household, 245 staff, and around £4 million a year in today's money. Chief Curator Tracy Borman takes up his story.
Fitzroy was really a chip off the old block. He was sporty, he was very musical, very charismatic. Fitzroy often deputised for the king, his father, at the great occasions of court, and even on one occasion, meeting the King of France himself, an indication of just how high in Henry's favour he was.
By this time, Henry VIII had 2 daughters. His first marriage had produced Mary, but in Henry's eyes his divorce from her mother, Catherine of Aragon, rendered her illegitimate too. Henry's second marriage to Anne Boleyn had resulted in Elizabeth, but as a woman she wasn't seen as a good option to inherit the throne either. The king was now behaving as if his son Fitzroy might actually be his chosen heir.
Well, we know that Henry VIII was considering it because we have the reports of ambassadors in his court, and one of them writes that Henry had certainly intended to make Fitzroy his successor. Another ambassador agreed, observing that the king's determination was that the succession should go to his illegitimate son.
The idea of putting an illegitimate son on the throne was deeply unconventional. But stranger things had happened during the king's reign.
Well, Henry had already proven that he was a man who just made his own rules. He'd overturned the religious establishment, broken from Rome, so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. So why shouldn't he just do the same again? He had a son, why not make him legitimate and put him on the throne? Maybe he could just pull it off.
But a twist of fate was to snatch the dream away from Fitzroy and his father.
At the beginning of July 1536, there were reports that Fitzroy was seriously ill. He was said to be in a state of rapid consumption, which meant tuberculosis. He hadn't been seen in public for a month, and by the end of July, he was dead, aged just 17. Henry VIII must have been devastated. He'd adored Fitzroy, and for him, there was nothing worse than losing a son.
This was a huge blow for the king, and he now once again faced the prospect of having no male heir.
I think we can tell how anxious Henry now was about that by the way he dealt with Fitzroy's burial, and we have a report of this. After being dead 8 days, Fitzroy has been secretly carried in a wagon covered with straw without any company except 2 persons clothed in green who followed at a distance into Norfolk. Well, I think this seems very odd. This is the king's son and he's being just quietly taken away for burial. But that was deliberate because Henry knew that Fitzroy's death threw everything into uncertainty, so he wanted it done quietly.
Henry must have felt inconsolable. He was unaware, however, this was to be a key turning point in history.
He didn't know that in just over a year he would have a healthy, living son. And we can only wonder what might have happened if Fitzroy had survived and gone on to be king.
Coming up, Nobby doesn't want to play ball.
Nobby! The thing of it is, he can be a bit grumpy sometimes.
And a captive king risks his life to flee from Hampton Court.
They despised the king, and they would take great delight in attacking him should they find him escaping.
It's mid-morning at Hampton Court stables.
Come on now. Steady, steady.
And today there's an important farming job to be done by one of the larger members of the palace team, Shire horse Nobby. He's got to prepare the land for sowing, using a metal harrow with the help of head groom Tom.
Good for him, it's good for the land, keep the land aerated a bit.
The Shire's connection to Hampton Court dates back to the 1500s, when Henry VIII wanted to breed the perfect horse for battle. Being so strong, they soon became a familiar sight on British farms. But with fewer than 3,000 left in the whole country today, shires are now deemed at risk. The team at Home Park are part of the last herd of working shire horses in London.
We use them still for a lot of conservation work. We do, of course, carriage rides in the palace gardens. People love the shire horse, of course. They have a lovely nature.
Nobby's one of the more experienced shires here.
We stand. We.
And is normally a gentle giant.
Come here. Get that.
But today, he doesn't seem to want to play ball. It's hard work manoeuvring a stubborn shire that weighs almost a ton.
Hold on, Tom. I want to hook the tree.
Okay, just hung him up again.
Yeah.
That'll be it.
Head coachman Ed McDowell knows all his animals very well.
Nobby is a character, you know. The thing of it is, he can be a bit grumpy sometimes, but he's usually good because he's an old boy, he knows the job. I'm not sure why he's playing up.
Seems like today just isn't Nobby's day.
Easy, easy.
Like us, they have good days and bad days. Some days they get out of bed the wrong side, same as we do.
Good boy.
After a rocky start, Nobby eventually consents to pulling the harrow.
He's a good lad, yeah. Usually.
The stables are located in Home Park, which occupies part of Hampton Court's 750 acres of parkland. It's home to ancient trees, rare plants, and herds of fallow and red deer. 500 years ago, deer hunting in the grounds was a favourite pastime for kings and queens, like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. The antlers were kept as trophies and proudly displayed at the palace. Eventually, King William III gave them a special space of their own, known as the Horn Room. Today, Preventative Conservation Supervisor Kerin Harris is checking up on these spiky specimens.
We look at these antlers about once every 1 to 2 years, and we carry out a condition check, and then we do a surface clean of them because they get quite dusty.
Amongst all the trophies, there's a truly whopping pair. These enormous antlers are thousands of years old. Originally belonging to a giant elk, they became a present for Charles II in the 1600s.
It was found in a bog in Ireland, and because of their age and because of their size, these elk antlers possibly are one of the oldest things on display at Hampton Court.
Being so valuable, the antlers require very careful handling.
We had to take these down a few years ago, and this was a 4-person job with 2 scaffolding and a bag underneath just in case it was dropped.
It's up to Kerin to make sure the antlers remain free of dust, which could eventually damage them.
I'm using a hog's hair brush, so it's nice and stiff, but it's not going to scratch the surface at all. This set is definitely the most impressive. Yeah. You can just imagine him roaming the moors in Ireland.
For centuries, kings and queens used Hampton Court to display their wealth and show off their impeccable taste. None more so than Charles I. By the mid-1600s, over 100 years after Henry VIII walked these corridors, Hampton Court had become Charles's pleasure palace. He stuffed it to the rafters with priceless objects.
He's collecting art, he's spending a fortune on buying up paintings and different pieces from all over the world.
But all this culture came with a price tag. Charles's lavish spending was starting to put people's backs up.
Charles doesn't know it yet, but he's actually surrounded by enemies, and Parliament are fed up of giving the king money. Parliament have had enough.
Relations between Parliament and the king went from bad to worse, eventually descending into outright civil war in 1642. Parliamentarians fought royalists in several bloody battles. But the most pivotal moment came one foggy morning on the 14th of June 1645 at the Battle of Naseby, where Charles's royalist forces were met by Sir Thomas Fairfax and his army of parliamentarians. An extraordinary relic from this battle is kept in the conservation studio at Hampton Court.
So this is made of cow leather, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Today, Royal Dress Collection Curator Alary Lynn and Curator Libby Thompson are doing a condition check on this very special garment.
So I think sort of a few layers sort of stuck and then stitched together.
That's typical for these sorts of jerkins. You can really feel how thick it is.
There you go. Okay. And then if you let that hang.
Known as a buff jerkin, clothing like this was worn whilst out riding and under armour during the Civil War. But what makes this one so special is who it belonged to.
Family legend goes that this was the leather jerkin left by Charles I after the Battle of Naseby. It's quite clearly a practical military object. It's really interesting now to see it on the mannequin, because what's very obvious to me is that it's cut in a very fashionable silhouette.
Charles I was ever the image-conscious king.
You can see with the thickness of this leather how it would have protected him.
But nice to know that he still wanted to be stylish whilst
Well,
he was
exactly.
being protected.
Exactly. He was fashionable even when worried for his life.
The jerkin is one of the most prized items in the Royal Ceremonial Dress Collection, which comprises around 10,000 objects.
It is a real privilege to look after objects like this, and I have a complete sense of humour failure when anybody asks me if I've ever tried these things on. The thought of it is just too horrific.
But whatever protection it offered, the jerkin couldn't save Charles from defeat. His forces were thrashed at Naseby, and within a year, the king had surrendered. He was brought to Hampton Court and placed under house arrest. His lavish palace had become his prison. Charles's arch-nemesis, Oliver Cromwell, began pressuring the king to sign a peace treaty to end the civil war formally. But the imprisoned king refused. Frustrated, a number of Charles's enemies considered more extreme ways to secure peace. On November the 11th, 1647, Charles was informed of a plot against his life. Chief Curator Tracy Borman is on the trail of this desperate king.
Well, I'm really excited to come back up here because it's really rare that I come up these stairs to the roof. This view, it never fails to take my breath away. It's just spectacular. You can see for miles around.
Charles knew that whilst he was under house arrest at Hampton Court, he wasn't safe. It was only a matter of time before his enemies would attack.
Charles had always been very fearful of assassination attempts, so when he heard there was a plot against his life, he immediately decided he had to escape from Hampton Court. Of course, though, it's not that easy. The place is teeming with guards, and the only real means of escape is by the river. So how on earth is he going to get from his prison here in the palace over there to safety?
Each evening, Charles's captors allowed him some privacy when writing letters. And on the evening of November the 11th, 1647, this gave him just the opportunity he needed. Around 6 p.m., along with an accomplice, Charles gathered his belongings and fled into the palace garden.
The accounts say he escaped through a private door through into the park.
Accounts describe a cloak and dagger scene of Charles dressed in disguise, seemingly taking every possible precaution.
But it does all sound a little bit farcical, because rather than a kind of James Bond-style escape, he brings his history books with him. He drops one of them on the way, and so it all descends into the ridiculous, I'm afraid. But it's easy, because of that, to lose sight of just how much danger Charles was in. The palace was teeming with guards, members of Cromwell's army. They despised the king, and they would take great delight in attacking him should they find him escaping.
Successfully dodging the guards, Charles gets across the gardens unscathed. But he's not home and dry yet.
Charles is within a whisker now of succeeding, of making his escape. All he has to do is get from this side of the river to the opposite bank in Thames Ditton, where there are men waiting to hurry him away on horseback. But this is, in a way, the most dangerous part of the whole escape. He could easily be spotted on the river.
But making it safely across the open water wasn't all the king had to worry about.
This was an impossible position for Charles, really, because he'd told Cromwell faithfully that he wouldn't escape from Hampton Court. And in breaking that promise, he was making himself untrustworthy. Well, if he lost the trust of the nation, he might as well give up his throne.
Despite the risks, Charles boarded his getaway vessel. With a thrust of oars, Charles's escape from Hampton Court was complete. But his triumph wouldn't last. Just over a year later, Charles was captured and imprisoned again, this time on the Isle of Wight. After 2 years of failed negotiations, Charles's time was up. He was executed on the orders of Oliver Cromwell, and the Civil War was over. But Charles's followers never forgot him. His jerkin at Hampton Court hides a clue to the legacy that lived on long after his death.
His status became almost saintly among those people who had been his followers. Over the centuries, potentially, people have come and cut away fragments of the leather and taken them away as sacred relics or mementos of King Charles I.
Luckily today, Hampton Court is a far safer place to be.
Where's my gal? How are you?
A mile away at the stables, Ed and Tom are busy loading up equipment and horses to take to the west front lawn for a spot of work.
Right, go on then, lad.
But someone is missing. Shire horse Nobby.
We found out, you know, the reason he was playing up was because of his tooth. He had a bad tooth. And he was trying to tell us that, and we found out that, so we had to go and have an operation.
Ed has a herd of other shires to choose from. Replacing Nobby isn't a problem.
That's Joe's, is it?
It's Joe's.
What's more of an issue is the noisy construction work just beside the field.
That's probably the first time seeing all that kind of commotion in the one spot. Every day you go out with horses, especially in today's world, there's so much traffic and so much things going on. So you never know what to expect. Okay, together, come up, come up.
Harrowing is an age-old method of aerating the soil to encourage plant growth. It's still effective today.
If you put a tractor out there, it compresses all the soil. And a horse, although they weigh a ton each, they don't actually compress the soil at all.
Come on together. Steady, steady, steady. Good lads.
I love it, you know, because we very rarely work on this side of the palace. This is the original, this is the Tudor bit here. And of course, Henry VIII had a big connection with shire horses. So somehow I always feel they're much more at home on this side, you know, in keeping, really.
Despite some noisy distractions, the shires have finished their work for the day. So it's back to the stables for a bucket and a brush. Coming up, will the tulips bloom in time for the festival's grand opening?
A lot of hard work has gone into this exhibition.
And will Nick's plan to encourage the sand martins back to Hampton Court have worked?
You've got the binoculars, haven't you, so we can take a look from over here.
It's May, and after nearly a year, the largest tulip festival in the country is now ready to open to the public.
It's a lovely, sunny day. The tulips are in bloom. Weeks and weeks of effort, a lot of trips to the osteopath, and a lot of hard work has gone into this exhibition.
Over 120,000 bulbs were planted in the gardens surrounding the palace. The displays now on show are a feast for the eyes. Flower beds bursting with beautiful tulips of all shapes, colours and sizes. Especially the centrepiece of the festival, here in Fountain Court.
This pinky, mauvey, whitey mix, as we call it, was something we blended ourselves. And the idea was for us to get a range of different types of tulips coming through the spring. So we're starting off with some single earlies, and then lily-flowered tulips, which are this strong mauve. So overall, you get this blend of tulips that's going to come up with different heights, and it's worked out perfectly. Nice when a plan comes together.
Graham's carrying out one last inspection to check that everything's looking its best, ready to welcome the first visitors.
Look at that size, that Darwin hybrid there. Look at the size of it, giant great flower. Wonderful thing.
There's one tulip in particular Graham's keen to take a look at, over in the orangery garden.
This is brilliant. This is tulip acuminata, as depicted in that Flora Legion painting that we saw.
The tulip Queen Mary II brought to Hampton Court is back on display after hundreds of years.
It's very exciting for us to see something that in 1 minute is depicted on a piece of paper, and here it is, the real living thing, and they're exactly the same. So it's very rewarding, very pleasing to see this here.
The massive task of planting more bulbs than ever before has been a huge success for Graham and his team.
Everything's flowered as it should. Some things have come a little bit early, some things are going to be a little bit later. But that's plants for you, you never can tell. But I think standing here on a lovely spring morning, ready for our Tulip Festival to open, I don't think I'd rather be in any other place.
Visitors can now finally get to enjoy the beautiful blooms on display. And a few miles away in the palace grounds, Park and Estate Manager Nicholas Mallory Garbett and his colleague Dennis Mantle are about to find out if some other visitors have arrived all the way from Africa.
So you'll probably just stick to the edge of the field here, just to keep a bit of distance.
They've come to check on the Sand Martin Bank.
You've got the binoculars, haven't you, so we can take a look from over here.
And see if all their hard work from the autumn has paid off.
So since we've done the work to clear that vegetation, the hope is that they'll be using kind of the spread right across the nest holes there.
That's brilliant. It's a real hive of activity.
They're nattering away, aren't they?
Take a look.
Yeah, I can see a number of birds flying in and out, and they look to be carrying some bedding material, so some grass that they've probably collected from the field. That's fantastic, yeah.
Well worth doing the clearing work.
Yeah.
Cây trái tiêu điều cũng siêu gió giông muôn chiều buồn thương vẫn dương canh trường tôi mãi gọi mình mình ơi tình vẫn còn thì thương chỉ dầu hát câu mong chờ thuyền ai xuôi quay về bờ mãi đợi chờ trong ngóng hoài mong buồn số phận hẩm hiu ôi buồn thiêu sao điều hiu ruộng sâu chân dướng nỗi sầu bao trái dầu lệ ứa hai hàng lệ ứa hai hàng
Trộn nói thôi mày có ai đừng bao giờ dạy con rằng là đi ra ngoài nhớ mắt nó đánh chết rất ngu đó nó có chú nó có bác nó mẹ bác nó cầm súng đấy nó bắn cái pặc bắn chết mày em có thể nói ngu em có thể nói ngu bắn cái pặc em có thể nói ngu nó có chú nó có bác nó em có thể nói ngu nó có chú nó có bác nó bắn cái pặc em có thể nói ngu bắn cái pặc bắn cái pặc bắn cái mày có ai tao sợ quá cơ hút tao lại sợ quá thôi tao sợ quá cơ hút tao lại sợ quá thôi tao lại sợ quá thôi tao lại sợ quá thôi sợ quá thôi mày có ai tao sợ quá cơ hút tao lại sợ quá thôi tao sợ quá cơ hút tao lại sợ.
It's a great result for the team. It's part of their overall aim in looking after Hampton Court's special 750 acres of parkland.
You've got your historical aspects where you've got the building, you've got all those artefacts that we're trying to preserve, but we're also looking after this living landscape. So we've got a duty to ensure that we look after the historical features of the park and its biodiverse landscape for the future.
Next time, A future queen fears for her life.
You can still absolutely sense Elizabeth's terror.
The Shires are put to the test.
I don't know what he's going to do. Steady, easy.
And Hampton Court remembers the heroes of World War I.
He may have thought, will I see my family again?